Hey, fourth graders. Today we will be doing lesson 5, and it's all about how can sound waves be used to send messages. So we can't physically see sound waves with our eyes, however, we can hear them. For example, the saxophone here, when you play it, you can hear the sounds coming out of it. So when we talk, we are sending messages through sound waves, and today we're going to learn about how we can group together those different types of sounds or waves to make it easier to communicate. Okay, so sound waves can be used to send messages. So that's not only just to hear things. When we talk, we are receiving information through a sound wave, and that's because they can travel from one place to another. Okay, and talking isn't the only way to send messages through sound waves. In Africa, they use drums at different pitches to send messages. So a higher pitch might mean something, and a lower pitch might mean something else, and they can use combinations of that to send a message from one person to the other. Okay, so we are going to learn about something called digitizing. So to digitize means to group into sections that can be represented by letters or numbers. Okay, so I'll give you an example to kind of explain how that works. Okay, so when you play an instrument, like a violin or a guitar or something, it can play many different pitches, and we call these notes. Okay, and although there's only 12 notes that are represented by a letter, an instrument can make many more pitches than that. Okay, so although there's only 12 notes, there's not only 12 sounds that it can make, and that's because we digitize it by grouping together similar notes. Okay, the reason we do this is because it makes it easier to read or write music. If you were to read a sheet of music and there was a different symbol for all the different sounds, it would make it really complicated. So we group together similar pitches to make it easier to communicate it. However, music isn't the only thing that's digitized. We can digitize other different types of waves or measurements as well. And that's because it makes it easier to communicate it to another person. So here are a couple different examples digitizing waves. So like we talked about, sound waves, like music and instruments. But you can also digitize water waves and like waves on a string. So I'll give you an example here, like jumping rope. If you were to see how many times someone jumped rope in 1 minute, the wave of the rope, and say they jumped it about 8 times. However, on the 8th time, it wasn't exactly under their feet. We kind of just round and we would say it's 8. That's because it makes it easier to communicate than saying, oh, it was 7 and then some decimal point or fraction or something. We round it up and say, oh, 8 times. Even though that might not be exactly it, it's close enough. That's called digitizing. We can also digitize measurements. So a good example of this could be your height. If you go to the doctors and they tell you your height, you might not be exactly 42 inches, but they round up and so that it's easier to communicate it to you rather than saying some exact really small decimal or fraction number. That makes it easier to communicate it. So that's what we talked about today, is how you can send messages and how you can group together different types of waves to make it easier to communicate.